Okay, so I've been here several times before, and I really appreciate your community. And I wanted to just start out with something that I learned when I was in Australia last year for a Buddhist conference. When the government officials opened the conference, they began by acknowledging that they were on Aboriginal land. And so I wanted to open this morning by acknowledging that we're on Native American land. So I'm supposed to talk about spiritual practice and the evening news. Which you usually think, if you're going to do spiritual practice, forget the evening news. And if you watch the evening news, you're going to be too depressed to do spiritual practice. Okay. So, on the first talk this morning, I talked a little bit about bringing compassion in when we watch the news and having compassion for everybody involved. And then in the break time, Susan asked me, well, one of the things that happens to me when I watch the news is I feel despair. And I think that's a very common feeling among people in our country when we watch the news. So, I didn't talk about that the first time because I really get on a soapbox when I start talking about the media. Because I think that we get manipulated by the media who reports certain stories, the stories they choose, and also how they report the stories in order to deliberately make us feel afraid. Okay? Because somehow, we get, we wake up when we feel afraid, and maybe it sells more magazines or whatever. But what I've noticed in the evening news, and what's so stark, is on one side, because I usually watch the news online, so here you have, people dying in the Japanese earthquake, people getting killed in Libya, and so on and so forth. And on the other side, you have, buy this beautiful, condo at such and such, and send flowers to your loved one. And there's this complete disconnect between the fear and violence that we're being fed on one hand, and the solution to it, on the other hand, is to go to this movie or buy this product or somehow indulge in our attachment. So that, I think, doesn't work at all. And it leaves us feeling very empty and a sense of despair, because I think that we feel the angst of the suffering in the world, and we know that getting all these material goods is not the answer to our angst, and yet that's what's being presented to us. So this is where I think spiritual practice really comes in, because spiritual practice is the antidote, the actual antidote to the sense of despair that we feel. But let me back up just 1 minute. I remember hearing His Holiness in Seattle some years ago, talking to the media, and he was saying to these reporters, oh, you do very good work. You have a big nose, and you sniff out all the corruption and report it. And he said, that's very good, you make people be more honest. But, he continued, you only report on the bad things that happen. How many people get murdered each day in a town? And yet that's what makes the headlines. Versus how many people in that town are kind to each other that day? And that doesn't make the headlines. So this is what I'm getting at, that we're being fed something that is half-baked, that's only part of the picture. And that's what makes us fall into despair, because we just see the violence, we see the anger, the jealousy, the arrogance, the lack of ethical discipline and concern for others. And then we feel like, wow, the whole world is just completely full of that and polluted, and there's no hope anywhere. But that's because the media isn't talking about the goodness that there is in the world. And so I think it's very important for us to balance things out by remembering the goodness. In our Buddhist practice, and this is part of our spiritual practice, is we meditate on the kindness of others. And it's a very important meditation. Because I think we so often take for granted the kindness of others. We just expect it. And that's why when we get the opposite, it sticks out so much. But I think in this day and age, we really need to really deliberately contemplate and come back to how we have been the recipient of kindness for many other people. So instead of just who got murdered, who has helped other beings today? Okay. And if we look in our lives, every single day of our life, we receive kindness from others. We receive benefit from others. Because it's only through the kindness that others give us that we're able to stay alive. I don't know about you, but I can't grow any food. I even try and grow a plant in my room and it usually dies. So, you know, feeding myself is difficult. I have no idea how to make the yarn that the sweater's made out of, or the polycotton that my skirt is made out of. It's other people's kindness who know how to do that, who wove the fabric. It's other people who designed this building, who built it, who stayed out in the hot sun or in the cold rain and snow building this building. You know, the plumbers, the electricians, the engineers, the architects, the construction workers. And I just come in here like I'm, you know, queen of the world, without even appreciating that all of this came due to the efforts and kindness of others. And just even getting here, you know, riding in a car, and where did the petrol for that car come from? Okay, do we think about the workers in Libya and Saudi Arabia and Bahrain? You know, do we think about their lives and what their lives are like under the governments that we support so that we can get the oil? Do we have a sense of receiving kindness from those people? Because without them, we wouldn't have the oil, the gas, petrol to get in our car and come here. And what about the construction workers, the road workers who make the highways? How often do we ever stop and say thank you to the people who are repairing or building the highways and the roads we drive on? Usually when we drive by, we're going, why are they fixing this road when I'm driving at it? They can do it perfectly well at 2 o'clock in the morning. When I'm not on the road, why don't they get out here and fix it then? Okay, but do you see what I'm saying? That our way of looking at things makes us unhappy. This is what the Buddha was talking about in that verse, those 2 verses that Susan read at the beginning. Okay? How we look at things determine how we experience them. But when we look at the workers and say, wow, thank you so much. You're working very hard and it's not so pleasant. But thank you because I'm benefiting from what you're doing. And so thinking that part of the news every day is not just the earthquakes and the wars and so on. Part of the news every day is the kindness that human beings show each other and the kindness that animals show us. And to really feel in our hearts that we're the recipient of kindness. Now, part of our mind is going to go, oh, well, yeah, that's very nice if you have a really luxurious life. but you know, I was abused as a child, and I was, you know, stuck in a country when they were, when there was warfare, and you know, there were all these people who were really mean to me. But it's the same thing as those verses the Buddha said. Are we going to focus on the abuse, or are we going to focus on the kindness? Are we going to see the suffering of the people who harm us and have compassion for them? Or are we going to stay fixated in they're horrible, bad people because they harm me? No. Aren't they more than one action they've done in their life? Weren't they overwhelmed by their own misery? And that's what made them do whatever they did that we felt pain from. You know, if we broaden our perspective and not just think of ourselves, but think of everybody, and that's what the reading from His Holiness was saying today, then we feel this commonality with others, and we can have some compassion for their experience and to wish them well. And when we have compassion, we can't feel despair. Okay? Because compassion, involved in compassion, is a sense of hope and optimism. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, you know, compassion etymologically means to suffer with. Okay? But we have to really understand what compassion properly means. Suffering with somebody doesn't mean that I feel so lousy that I get depressed. Because if I get depressed and overwhelmed by despair, who can I help? I can't help anybody else. I can't even help myself, because my mind is twisted in an unrealistic and non-beneficial view of the world. If we realize that suffering arises due to causes and conditions, and that those causes and conditions can be stopped, they can be dissolved, they can be eliminated, then if the causes and conditions of suffering can be stopped, so can the suffering. So when we have compassion for those who are suffering, we have to realize that suffering can be overcome and eliminated, which means we have an attitude of hope and optimism, no matter what is going on. And that's really important that we have that feeling. Yeah, it's much more realistic. You may say, well, yeah. But if you look at His Holiness Dalai Lama, he's been a refugee since he was age 24. Okay? So imagine being a refugee for over 50 years, watching there be genocide in your country, and nuclear dumping in your country, and environmental destruction in your country. You know, and meanwhile you can't go back, and the government who took over your country is saying you're a splitter of the motherland and the cause of all evil here. Most of us would just feel like, well, what's the use? But that's not His Holiness's viewpoint. It's like he is optimistic and he is hopeful, and he keeps working for the good in the world with compassion. Okay? Because the compassion gives him this hope and the energy to do what is ever possible to remedy things. And so I think that's the attitude we have to greet life with. What do you think? Can you do it? Because the thing is, you know what happens when we feel despair? It's like, oh, the whole world's so screwed up, and there's nothing I can do about it. We feel like a complete victim. Who made us into a victim? We think, oh, it's all the screwed up people out there that make me a victim of all the wrong stuff they're doing. That's not true. We make ourselves into a victim by looking at the world in this skewed way that says there's only suffering, there's only, evil. That's a totally skewed way of looking at life, that we turn ourselves into a victim. Okay? And what's very interesting is when we feel like a victim, then we have no responsibility. We can just sit back and complain. Because it's all everybody else's fault. Now, I know complaining is one of my favorite activities. Yeah. If they offered a PhD in one, I would have gotten it. Easily. I can complain. If you ever need somebody to complain for you, ask me. I can do it. Okay. But it doesn't get me anywhere. All it gets me is despair, depression, and it's completely unrealistic. But when I look at the kindness in the world, and I see the goodness in other people, and I see the goodness in myself, the world is the same, but my attitude is different. And then I can go forth and give kindness and receive kindness. And with compassion, do whatever small or big thing I can do to improve the condition of other living beings here. So that's what we have to do. Then, no more depression, no more despair, and no more victim mentality. Go for it.